My name is Paul Cooper. My soon-to-be ex-wife is Paige. We first met at a college party and hit it off right away. That night, we hooked up, and I was intrigued by how adventurous she was. While it was exciting, it did make me wonder just how experienced she was to be so confident. We exchanged numbers, and I thought that would be it. But she texted me later that week, asking if I'd be at the next party. I wasn't planning to go, but her invitation changed my mind, and I looked forward to more fun. This led to us meeting up nearly every weekend at whichever party she mentioned, and, like any college guy thrilled with great company and better intimacy, I followed her around eagerly. After a couple of months of this, she surprised me by asking to meet for lunch during the week. I thought we'd discuss the next party, but it turned out she had something else in mind. She confessed that she really liked me and wanted us to start dating more seriously. When I asked if that meant being exclusive, she hesitated and said she wanted me to be her main guy, but didn't think that meant I'd be the only one. I explained that I enjoyed our time together, but wouldn't be interested in a more serious relationship unless it was exclusive. Her reaction told me she was seeing at least one other guy, which later turned out to be true. This realization didn't bother me much, as we weren't exclusive, and we met at a party. It was what it was. My dad's advice played a big part in how I handled this. On the way to university, he gave me a long talk about how a wrong choice could ruin my life, warning me about trusting anyone who claimed to be on birth control. He recounted the story of my uncle, whose life fell apart after being trapped with child support for a child that wasn't his. That lecture stayed with me, and I was determined not to end up in the same situation. When I told Paige my conditions for exclusivity, she paused, but then said she wanted to try it. I double-checked that this meant no other partners, and she agreed. We started spending time together nearly every day, and I felt like the luckiest junior in college. I was in a prestigious program, maintaining top grades, well-liked by my professors, and had a stunning girlfriend who was as engaged as I was. Things were great for about 5 months. Paige started saying she loved me and wanted us to stay together through the summer break. Even though I wasn't head over heels, I did care for her and stayed focused on my academics. It wasn't until spring break that the first real problem emerged. I planned to go home for the week and asked if she wanted to join me. She seemed uncertain and nervous, deflecting my questions about her plans. She only mentioned hanging out with friends, which made me suspicious. That weekend, I stayed more sober than usual. After we were intimate, I checked her phone, which I'd managed to unlock after observing her use it. It turned out to be her birthday as the passcode. That night, when she was exhausted and her wine glass empty, I went through her messages. What I found confirmed my gut feeling. She had been texting an old hookup who had been trying to persuade her to go on a spring break trip with him. Initially, she resisted, saying she was happy with me and knew I'd break up with her if I found out. However, when he offered an all-expenses-paid trip to Cancun, she caved and agreed, even asking her friends to cover for her. I noted down their names, knowing who their boyfriends were. Digging deeper into their group chat, I discovered that all her friends were involved in similar cheating behavior, some even with her ex. It was a deal-breaker for me. While I was disappointed, I told myself I'd get over it by summer and refocus on my studies in mechanical engineering. The next morning, I made her coffee and suggested a shower together, which she eagerly accepted. That was the first time my frustration showed during an intimate moment. It was more intense than usual. Oddly enough, this became a turning point in how I handled my relationships later. When we finished, she was worn out, struggling to get ready. When she finally made it to the kitchen, I was waiting with my phone recording. She looked confused and asked what had just happened. I smiled and told her I was making the most of our final week together. She blinked, unsure of what I meant, and asked if I was ending things and whether I was cheating. I told her calmly that I had never cheated and never would, and then I turned the question to her. Could she say the same? Her expression turned pale as she stammered, asking why I would ask such a thing. I simply replied that since she brought it up, it was only fair for me to know. She paused for a moment, startled, and firmly said she had never cheated on me. I nodded and told her that I believed her, mentioning that I had seen her text conversations with friends and even messages to an old flame confirmed she hadn't been unfaithful. Gently, I took her hands in mine, trying to comfort her while maintaining eye contact. I then asked, with a calm but serious tone, whether she would ever consider being unfaithful in the future. Finally, I directly asked if she had any plans to cheat or if it was ever a possibility. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held onto my hands, still strong yet tender in her grip. I urged her to respond. She pulled her hands back and covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably. Through her tears, she nodded, admitting the possibility. A few minutes later, she composed herself and told me everything. She asked how I knew, and I told her a small lie, that someone had overheard him bragging. Her tears shifted to anger in an instant. She revealed that he was the only person she had a casual relationship with before committing to me. He had a girlfriend at the time, but was also seeing other girls on the side. During that period, they would meet once or twice a week, while his girlfriend was busy with classes and he spent weekends with her while seeing me as well. Once we agreed to exclusivity, she stopped seeing him, but he had asked for one last fling before graduation. She admitted that she hadn't realized how much damage this could cause until I started questioning her, making her picture losing me. She confessed she genuinely loved me and couldn't imagine her life without me, vowing she would do whatever it took to keep me from leaving. I told her that if she truly meant it, she needed to cancel her upcoming trip and tell his girlfriend the truth. She protested, saying that it would ruin his future as he was about to start working for her father after graduation. I explained that this would be a necessary step for her to understand the consequences of her actions, and if I had to do it myself, it meant she wasn't fully committed. She reluctantly agreed and arranged a lunch meeting to come clean, during which she confessed not only her involvement, but also mentioned that he had been involved with some of her friends. The confrontation turned ugly, leading to a major fallout. His girlfriend broke up with him and rescinded the job offer he was counting on, telling him off in the process. This setback was significant because by then, most positions for graduates in his field were filled, leaving him with limited options for employment. Angry and desperate, he began sending threatening messages and stalking Paige, forcing her to file a police report, adding a record to his troubles. I told Paige that she needed to feel the weight of what I had experienced to understand how destructive her choices were. Unsure if our relationship would survive, I presented a drastic test. I knew which of her friends were unfaithful and told her that if she was truly committed to proving herself, she would need to arrange a one-time spring break gathering involving herself and her 3 unfaithful friends. At first, she was adamantly against it. I calmly told her that she could refuse, but I would then reveal everything to their boyfriends. When she asked how I knew about her friends, I told her it didn't matter. Despite trying to talk her way out of it, I asked why it was acceptable for her to indulge in reckless behavior with someone else, yet unacceptable for me to consider such an idea. I told her I intended to teach her and her friends a lesson in loyalty, putting them to the test. After much debate and my reminder that this was about proving her sincerity, she agreed. She informed her friends that I was aware of their actions and that if they didn't comply, their partners would find out. Suddenly, they all found excuses involving sick relatives. Right before the planned week, I had one final conversation with Paige. I assured her that she didn't have to go through with this, but our relationship would likely end after school. She insisted that she loved me and would go through with it to prove her regret. She promised to make it a memorable week so I would know she was truly remorseful. I reiterated that if we were to move forward, there could be no one else for either of us. She agreed, saying she had already decided that commitment was the key to strengthening our bond. This was our second serious discussion about loyalty. Yes, I did spend that week with her friends, which she had agreed to as a test of her sincerity. She later admitted that she never considered it cheating, as she had agreed to the terms. She promised that she would never consider being unfaithful again if we could work through this together. The following year, we were inseparable, and it felt like we were on the path to rebuilding trust. Her friend's infidelity came to light later, and their partners ended the relationships. Not because of me. Paige confessed that she believed we would have ended up like them without these drastic measures. After graduation, with a promising job lined up, I approached her father to ask for his blessing to propose. He admitted that he knew something significant had happened the previous year, but wasn't sure what it was. He remarked that Paige had changed for the better and seemed more grounded. He pushed for more information, and I told him we had experienced a major challenge, but now had a clear understanding moving forward. This reassured him, and he stated he would give his blessing on one condition: a prenuptial agreement. Surprised, I agreed, as long as it was fair and included consequences for infidelity on both sides. He looked at me and asked, "So, it was her?" I told him that I had caught her before anything happened and that I hadn't made it easy for her. He chuckled, admitting he thought it had been me. That weekend, I discussed the prenup with Paige, explaining what I considered cheating, which included emotional connections, premeditated actions, flirting, and any intimate contact. I reminded her how attractive she was and warned that people would try to win her over. I emphasized that if she ever crossed the line, it would be the end. She promised to stay faithful and agreed with our other life plans. When I proposed, she said yes. Unknown to me, when her father explained the terms of the prenup, she realized he knew something but signed it anyway without reading through all the details. Fast forward to today. I'm now a mechanical engineer with a knack for technology, a skill I had honed in college. Being in charge of our finances, I noticed the phone bill appeared thicker than usual 3 months ago. Though we had unlimited data, the breakdown showed an unfamiliar number she frequently contacted. To investigate, I casually mentioned an upcoming phone upgrade offer and told her I'd need her phone the next day. This would give her time to delete anything she wanted, putting her at ease. She provided her password, and I reassured her that I wouldn't snoop. A small but significant lie. The next day, after picking up the new phones, I used my technical skills to mirror her old phone data. I also discreetly installed monitoring software to access her calls and messages. The following day, I began reviewing her communications at work. At the hospital where my wife worked as an RN managing her floor, there was a young doctor whom we'll call Dr. Slimeball. Over the past 5 months, he'd been relentless in trying to charm his way into her life, but she consistently rejected him, making it clear that she was happily married and would never betray me. She even shared parts of our past and the fact that she had signed a prenuptial agreement. But none of this deterred him. Dr. Slimeball kept scheming, even arranging situations to have lunch with her. She admitted to him that she saw through his tactics and insisted she wouldn't jeopardize our marriage. 3 months of pressure wore her down, though. In text to her friends, she confided about considering reporting him to HR, but feared they'd keep him, as he was valued for his skills, and she could be easily replaced. She had worked tirelessly for years, taking extra shifts to stay on the path to becoming head nurse, and raising an issue could jeopardize her career. Meanwhile, Dr. Slimeball had a reputation for sleeping with various staff members, nurses, doctors, lab techs, even orderlies, regardless of their marital status. The hospital management knew about his behavior but overlooked it, until a lab tech's husband threatened legal action. Soon after, that tech left both the job and her marriage, a fate Paige feared. Dr. Slimeball made his final move by mentioning an upcoming conference where he was a speaker. He implied that if she agreed to be his date, the harassment would stop, and her promotion would come soon. She told him she'd never cheat, even if it cost her job. He insisted she get my permission first, saying it wouldn't be infidelity if I approved. She refused, stating I'd never agree. Dr. Slimeball seized the moment, reminding her that I wanted children and suggested she promise to stop birth control if I allowed the trip. He even twisted the past, saying I owed her for how harshly I'd treated her before, despite her not cheating back then. His manipulative words started to shake her resolve. He claimed it would be a way to reset things and become friends afterward. Although she admitted she was attracted to him, she didn't like him as a person and wouldn't consider a relationship. When he belittled me, she shut him down, warning him that if he disrespected me again, she'd report him. She even told him that she and her college friends had once joked that I was the best partner any of them had experienced, and rumors said he was selfish and underwhelming. Furious, he denied it. She left the conversation open-ended, but warned him to never push her again. The past 3 months had been full of intimacy between us, almost daily and particularly passionate on weekends. Mornings often started with her waking me up affectionately, and I suspected it was driven by guilt. While I enjoyed it, I found it amusing that she would act like it was routine. As a mechanical engineer with a penchant for creating devices, I had set up a workshop in our garage. One of my recent projects was a gadget linked to an AI system that could trigger a small, harmless explosion if someone came too close to specific items. I rigged this device to some personal items of hers, including her wedding dress and her grandmother's ring, replicated in a fake case. The setup was designed to douse her belongings in green paint if tampered with, but it wouldn't harm her, only create a shocking mess. I had prepared this setup because I suspected she was about to propose something drastic. Our YouTube channel, which started as a showcase of my inventions and grew into a home renovation channel, had about 4,300 subscribers, mostly friends and family. For the first time, I announced an impromptu live stream and invited them to tune in for a special surprise. The AI was set to prompt certain tasks she'd need to perform at unpredictable times, so she couldn't prepare in advance. The first task was to call Dr. Slimeball's wife and disclose his behavior and pressure tactics. I knew she had told him she wouldn't leave the house until we talked. That day, I texted her saying I'd be late and picked up a bouquet on the way home, planning to tell her about my promotion, which came with a substantial raise. It was a life-changing offer, $500,000 annually, plus bonuses, in another state where I'd manage a new division. I arrived home an hour late, knowing she was anxious. Dr. Slimeball had been bombarding her with messages, urging her to come to his hotel room, and she kept responding that she'd wait until our conversation. I stepped into the house, where she was dressed up, looking more nervous than ever. The live stream was on, capturing the moment. I approached her with the roses, saying, "These are for my incredible wife." She blushed, kissed me, and expressed her gratitude. I asked why she was so dressed up and if we had plans. She shook her head, saying we needed to talk. I sat down, and she handed me a beer, confessing her love and hinting that life was about to change. I played along, saying I had great news too, but encouraged her to go first. She spoke about her hard work at the hospital and her hopes for the head nurse promotion. I smiled at the camera and said, "You absolutely deserve it." She mentioned how money would help us, and I reassured her, teasing that I had news about that too. She paced as I continued to nod to the camera, subtly hinting at the unfolding plan. Finally, she brought up a work problem and said she'd found a solution that would secure our future. I told her, "Honey, our future is already secure," and gave a knowing wink to the camera as I added, "I promise." That's when her phone started ringing. It was her sister. I urged her to continue with what she needed to say, adding that I couldn't hold in my own news for much longer. She paused and asked, "You have something to share too?" I nodded, saying yes, but insisting she go first. She tried to get me to reveal my news, but I stayed firm, only after she spoke. Her phone buzzed again, this time with 3 texts and a call. When she reached for it, I quickly grabbed it, telling her that someone might be trying to spoil my surprise, so I wouldn't let her have it until we were done. She took a deep breath and said, "I don't think you're going to like what I have to say." I put on a concerned expression, set my phone down so it captured most of the room, and stepped closer. The live stream viewership had skyrocketed to 200, and I knew the moment was about to get intense. She turned to me and began explaining how the new doctor at the hospital had been harassing her for months, and that she had found a solution to make it stop. Trying to stay supportive, I said, "I'm glad you found a way to put an end to this, but why didn't you tell me earlier?" She looked at me, guilt in her eyes, and said she feared losing her job if she spoke up. She added that she loved me and wanted to start a family. I lifted her off her feet, telling her how happy it made me to hear that, and how long I had waited for this moment. I reassured her of my love and said she'd make an incredible mother. Encouraged by my reaction, she continued, but it was clear she was anxious. The only way to stop Dr. Slimeball's advances was to agree to go to the conference with him this weekend, she said, her phone buzzing constantly. I gently set her down and took a step back. "What do you mean by, go to the conference with him?" I asked directly. She hesitated before muttering, "You know what I mean." My face hardened. "Say it clearly, to my face," I demanded. She looked panicked and quickly backtracked. "Never mind, I'm not going." I pressed on. "Did you already make arrangements to meet him?" She nodded reluctantly, adding that she wouldn't go through with it now. I asked for the location of the conference, and when she refused, I warned her that if I had to find out myself, I'd confront him. By now, I was aware that her colleagues watching the live stream were alerting management and probably Dr. Slimeball himself. Tears welled in her eyes as she explained how he had coerced her, detailing how he had pursued and manipulated many women in the hospital. "Who else?" I asked coldly. She began naming those involved and recounted the tactics he used, including details about higher-ups complicit in his behavior and the lab tech whose life had fallen apart. She admitted that everyone knew the hospital was protecting him, and she feared retaliation if she filed a complaint. His promise of securing her promotion and ending his advances had been the last straw. I glanced at my phone. 27,000 viewers were now tuned in, including staff from the hospital. "I thought my news would change our lives," I said, catching her off guard. "What news?" she asked. I took a deep breath and said, "I just got a major promotion with a significant pay raise. I'll be managing an entire division, thanks to a patent on one of my inventions that sold for over $100 million. The color drained from her face. She dropped to her knees in the kitchen, overwhelmed, and began sobbing uncontrollably. I passed her phone back and said, "I had booked us a weekend getaway with a flight in 2 hours, but don't worry about coming. You should go to your conference." She begged me to stay, saying she couldn't go through with it, and was disgusted with herself. I told her both options were off the table. Checking her phone, I saw frantic messages from friends who knew her plan. I took it back and scrolled through. "Hello, Olivia," I said, seeing her sister's name pop up. "I see you thought this wasn't a big deal. I wonder if your husband and parents feel the same way." I found messages from her married friends and read aloud. "Wendy, the director of nursing? You told Paige just to go along with it and that the hospital would back him up? Get over herself and her husband's outdated values?" With the camera still recording, I said, "Wendy, I hope you enjoy facing the consequences." I noticed the live stream view count had surged to 65,000. "I think we've seen enough. Anyone know a good lawyer? Send me their info." With that, I ended the stream. Paige was a broken mess on the kitchen floor. I decided not to activate the AI prank. It was clear I needed to play the role of the hurt, dignified husband for the fallout to come. The hospital, her friends, and everyone involved would face exposure. She didn't even try to get her phone back, curled up and sobbing. Stepping over her, I grabbed a few beers and headed to my workshop to deconstruct the setup. Staying sober was not on the agenda. After an hour, I had cleaned up and hung her wedding dress and belongings safely in my shop. I called her father and asked to meet for drinks, and he said he and his wife were already on their way. Then I called my dad, who had watched the live stream. He said he was sorry for what happened, but noted how coincidental it was that I caught it all on video. I told him he knew me well, and to leave it at that. He mentioned that Mom was already making my favorite cookies and expected me soon. I told him I'd be over the next day, since I needed to unwind that night. Paige's phone had gone silent, but I had taken plenty of screenshots and forwarded voicemails. The fallout would extend beyond the hospital and to every friend who encouraged or excused her behavior. Even her sister, who hinted at having her own future plans, wasn't going to be spared. When Ben, my father-in-law, arrived, we headed out to my workshop while Lila, his wife, went inside to talk to Paige. I handed Ben a beer, and he took it with a nod of gratitude. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only 5 minutes. Finally, he broke the silence. "That was quite a show," he said, pausing before adding, "It's interesting that you planned this big YouTube live stream just as everything unfolded." I stayed quiet. Ben was sharp, and I respected him too much to lie. He clearly knew I had set things up. I asked him how Lila was handling the situation. He sighed heavily, explaining that he wasn't sure if she was more angry or heartbroken. He'd never seen her so distraught, which is why it took them longer to get to my place. I thanked him for coming and admitted I couldn't imagine how hard this was for their family. He mentioned that he had seen when I exposed Olivia, Paige's sister, on the live stream, and told me that Olivia's husband had already walked out on her, at least for the night. Ben also revealed that Olivia, who had a prenup, admitted she was open to cheating and had plans to act on it eventually. He said, "It was clever of you to get Paige to admit she had planned to cheat before anything actually happened. That's when I knew you orchestrated this." He brought up the specific clause in Paige's prenup and noted that it was clear I had been watching her closely for some time. He asked me what my next move would be. I admitted, I honestly don't know. Part of me wants to forgive her and move forward, but the trust is shattered. He nodded, saying he hoped I could find a way to forgive her and move past it. But he also knew it wasn't her first lapse in judgment, which is why I'd insisted on the prenup clause. I asked him what he would have done in my shoes before he had kids. He looked me in the eye and said, I'd have thrown her out and dealt with the guy who pursued her. I told him that was my first instinct as well, but acknowledged the pressure Paige had been under and how she had defended me along the way. He looked surprised and asked how I knew that. I just gave him a knowing look and said, let's call it an educated guess. He shook his head, muttering. This just got more complicated. I agreed. Then I asked if borrowing his tough-as-nails lawyer would be a conflict if I didn't immediately file for divorce. Ben said that if I didn't proceed with a divorce for at least 12 months and gave Paige a genuine chance with counseling, he'd cover the attorney's fees himself. Even if I decided to end the marriage later, he promised his support. We shook hands, and I asked him to take me to a bar and help me drown my sorrows. Inside the house, Lila was trying to help Paige pull herself together. Lila eventually told Paige that Ben and I were talking and advised her to give me space to process everything. Paige, desperate to talk, said she needed to fix things immediately. Lila firmly responded, "You should never do anything so severe that it needs undoing." She asked Paige if her career at a hospital that tolerated such behavior was really more important than her marriage. Paige, sobbing, admitted she had been too blinded by fear of losing her job and being blacklisted. She had worked tirelessly for the promotion and felt she deserved it. But Lila challenged her, asking if I deserved loyalty more than she deserved the promotion. That broke Paige down even further. Paige asked if I was still there. Lila told her that Ben and I had gone out to a bar and would be staying at a hotel before I headed to my parents' house the next day. The fallout from this was monumental. The story was picked up by local news that night and hit the papers the following day. The focus was on the pervasive culture of harassment at the hospital, triggering investigations by authorities with far more resources than I had. When the dust settled, 12 employees were fired and 3 were arrested. Dr. Slimeball, the director of nursing, Don, and the head of HR. The lab tech who had been wrongfully dismissed was offered her job back, along with a raise and a sizable settlement. Paige, too, was offered the head nurse position and a substantial settlement, but hadn't accepted anything yet. She was on paid leave, and I suspected she could extend that for several months. The hospital offered me a $2 million settlement, which I hadn't accepted yet. I was reviewing the final wording to ensure it didn't shield the 3 individuals I intended to sue. Once clarified, I planned to pursue them into financial ruin, regardless of whether I collected anything. It came out that the HR director had been in a relationship with Dr. Slimeball and covered for him because he had leverage over her. The DON, who advised Paige to compromise her integrity and dismissed me as prehistoric, was charged as an accomplice to harassment and blackmail. She made a deal to avoid prison by agreeing to testify and provide full disclosure, which implicated several others. This led to 4 divorces and strained many more marriages. These findings spurred additional settlements and lawsuits targeting Dr. Slimeball and the HR director, leaving their lives in shambles. The Don avoided divorce only because her husband had her sign a postnup that allowed him complete control for a decade. If he chose to leave, he would take everything. The HR director faced severe charges, including coerced harassment and blackmail related to Paige's ordeal, resulting in a 9-year prison sentence and financial devastation. Dr. Slimeball attempted to flee, but was caught at the airport with $100,000 in cash and evidence of offshore transfers. His bail was revoked, and he spent over a year in pretrial detention as new charges kept piling up. When his lawyer realized there would be no payment, Dr. Slimeball ended up with an overworked public defender. He eventually pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence and received 21 years behind bars. Rumor has it his personal life hasn't slowed down in prison, but now it comes with far greater consequences. 2 months after everything unfolded, I arranged counseling sessions for Paige and me. During the first 5 weeks, we didn't speak directly. Instead, Ben acted as the middleman, passing messages back and forth. By then, I had already moved to the new city for my job promotion. The arrangement was simple. If Paige wanted to see me, she would have to come to me, making the process difficult and reflective of the effort needed to repair the relationship. I was prepared for her to give up, which would have led to an easy divorce in my favor, but I wanted her to grasp just how much she had risked. Initially, our counseling sessions were online, and while they helped a bit, they didn't lead to significant progress. When I suggested we meet in person, Paige immediately agreed. She flew out the following week, with her father footing the bill for her extended stay lodging. Although Ben tried to remain neutral, he leaned toward my side, especially given the strain Paige's actions had placed on their family. Meanwhile, Olivia, Paige's sister, was facing her own divorce, adding to the chaos in their household. What struck me most was how Ben and Lila supported each other through it all. They exemplified the unity and strength I had always wished for in my own marriage. During one of our counseling sessions, I brought this up, questioning how two such supportive parents could have raised daughters willing to cheat. The counselor suggested that modern societal norms play a role in shaping these choices. When I asked if there was a way to shift this mindset and encourage better decisions, she responded, "If I knew how, I'd be the richest person on the planet." Over time, it became clear that my anger stemmed from Paige's disregard for my number one priority: fidelity. Whether she misunderstood its importance or chose to ignore it, I struggled with the notion of whether she truly grasped consequences or believed forgiveness was always an option. The counselor pointed out that I had put Paige in a no-win scenario, where no response could fully satisfy me because it would contradict another part of my dilemma. When asked if I had known about her potential actions and set her up, I didn't give the straightforward answer the counselor wanted. Instead, I explained, if I knew and stopped her, I'd never find out if she'd choose to be faithful on her own. What mattered was discovering her choice and whether she'd expect me to accept it. I then turned to Paige and asked if she thought I would still want to have children with her. This question broke her, and she cried so intensely that the session ended early. I told the counselor that addressing this question was essential if we were ever to move forward. In our next session, Paige acknowledged, "If you don't trust me to be faithful, then having children doesn't make sense." She offered to be a stay-at-home wife and mother, even proposing a stricter postnup that would ensure I was fully protected. She revealed that her trust fund would become available in a little over a year, suggesting that we could live off that while I saved my earnings in an untouchable account. She promised that if we divorced, she would cover our expenses and guarantee equal custody, unless she cheated, in which case I'd receive full custody. She even suggested including a clause allowing me to see other women discreetly, although she hoped it would never come to that. Paige confessed that just imagining me going away for a weekend with someone else made her so angry and sick that she couldn't eat for days. She admitted that the thought alone had taken weeks to recover from and said, "I finally understand why you might have felt capable of confronting or even hurting Dr. Slimeball if our roles were reversed." After our first in-person counseling session, Paige asked if we could have dinner together. She arrived in a light yellow sundress, one of my favorites. Although I knew she was trying to sway me, I reminded myself to stay firm. I had grown used to daily intimacy, especially on weekends, and being apart for over 3 months had been difficult. Despite the temptation, I kept my resolve. She asked to see my new place, curious about my motives. I questioned why she wanted to visit, and she said she wanted to check on how I was doing and hoped for a chance to reconnect. I asked if she was still on birth control, and when she said yes, I led her to my car. She mentioned needing her overnight bag, but I told her I had everything she'd need at my place. She smiled, and what started as 3 days turned into 6 years.